This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical or health advice. This podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice, nor have the statements been evaluated by the US FDA or similar international bodies. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of information shared during this podcast. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host. Greetings, health and human enthusiasts, and welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm your trusted guide, Dr. Scott Johnson, and I'm both humbled and thrilled that you've chosen to join me on this fearless pursuit of knowledge and inspiration. My mission is to elevate your well-being naturally, arming you with evidence-based insights, revolutionary breakthroughs, and impactful health tactics. But that's not all. Together, we'll dive deep into the mysterious realms of human existence, unraveling the secrets of what makes us truly thrive. This podcast isn't just about information. It's a catalyst for change. Join me in confidently exploring potent natural solutions, cutting-edge health strategies, and igniting courageous conversations that cultivate meaningful connections and foster empathy for humankind. I'm here to empower you to unleash your extraordinary potential and lead a life jam-packed with boundless health and happiness. So get ready. Your extraordinary journey to boundless health and happiness starts now. Hello, listeners, and thank you for joining the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Johnson, and today I'm hoping to shed some light on a somewhat controversial topic, that of cholesterol and whether it is harmful. If you were to go on social media, any platform really, and listen to 10 influencers talk about this subject, chances are you would get a variety of answers, and each of them would be able to cite research supporting their answer. But as with all research, you need to look at the funding and the motives behind it. So to cut through this, I'm invited Dr. Quinto Pauletti, or Dr. Q, to the show. He is a father, husband, and pioneer in the alternative health space. After personally being impacted by our country's broken traditional healthcare model, he flipped the script and created a hybrid model to serve his patients from near to far. This personalized direct approach to transforming patients' lives works by combining an in-person and virtual model to find root cause solutions to today's health problems. Dr. Q brings a unique approach to treatment by combining the structural, metabolic, and emotional aspects of your health into one comprehensive model. He seeks to upend the days of cookie-cutter medicine and specialist after specialist and replace it with a doctor-directed root cause medicine, thus transforming patients' lives. He has devoted his life to breaking barriers, finding real answers, and getting people well. So welcome, Dr. Q.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it for having me.
Well, I'm excited about this topic because, as you and I both know, there's a lot of literature about cholesterol and risks versus benefits. And for the average layperson, it's hard to cut through that and really find truth. And so I've been wanting to have this topic for quite a while so that we could really talk about what is the truth about cholesterol.
Yeah.
But to have the conversation, I think it's important we first talk about what it is. So can you explain the actual function of cholesterol in the body and why it is essential for our health?
Yeah. So cholesterol is a sterol. So that last little bit of the word means fat. And that's a fat substance found in every cell in the body. And it's essential for almost every function. And it's key in our cell membranes, production of hormones, vitamin D synthesis, bile acid production, insulation of our nerves. And so, think about how important every single one of those functions are and the impact they have and why we need cholesterol, why we make cholesterol, and, why it's so important.
Yeah, cholesterol over the past several years really has got such a bad rap to the point where you almost say cholesterol and it's like you've said a dirty word because
Yeah.
people are so scared of it. They don't understand how important it is for their health, and how integral it is in several pathways that are just so important to human health. So much so that for more than half a century, total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol have been considered the leading cause of cardiovascular disease. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how did this misconception that dietary cholesterol directly causes heart disease originate, and why does it persist?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, the early research, Ansel Keys research in the 1950s, there's a diet heart hypothesis. Um, those were kind of where it all started, where it was like, hey, we had this correlative fact that high cholesterol, high dietary fat has an increased incidence of heart disease. All right, well, there's some of that truth on the surface. And then the other big thing was the media and the public messaging, the food industry, and how they've gotten on top of that thing, right? It used to be fat is bad, low fat diets, introduction of margarine and all these bad oils. And so that was kind of where it all started. And, the guidelines are starting to change, it's starting to come back around. People are understanding that seed oils and trans fats are bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're starting to get that shift, but it was a lot of this early research in the 1950s, 60s, where that low fat trend started and the government backed it. And so that's kind of where it started. So I think that's where the misconception came from. And then, the introduction of statins, and then we can go down that cascade, but we'll get there, I think.
It's interesting that you mentioned that there are studies that they would find cholesterol and when people who had heart disease, and so they'd say, oh, the cholesterol is the cause. I like to use the example of, just because you see a fireman at a fire doesn't mean he's the cause of the fire. He's there to actually battle that fire, and cholesterol is in a similar fashion there in our arteries, fixing and repairing things, the damage that's happening on the inside of our arteries. So I do want to get into the research, because I think that that's important that we talk about what research is out there. So can you discuss any significant studies or scientific evidence that challenge the traditional view of cholesterol as the primary cause of heart disease?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one is the Framingham Heart Study. That's probably the longest standing study in existence right now. I mean, it's been going on since 1948, and they've been tracking all this cardiovascular data. And they're looking at heart disease risk, other factors of high blood pressure, smoking, diabetes, cholesterol, and how they all impact the roles of heart disease. And, finally, over time, they've figured out that cholesterol is not the risk factor. It's all those other things that have a way bigger impact on heart disease, not your cholesterol. Cholesterol just reacts to those other things. And so that's what a lot of people don't necessarily understand. Another good one is the Lion Diet Heart Study, where it looks at the Mediterranean diet on heart disease outcomes, which is a diet high in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, good fats like olive oil, avocados, coconut oil, and how that has a significantly lower recurrence of heart disease. So the studies go on and on. There's the PURE study, the Minnesota Coronary Heart Experiment. And then there's just meta-analysis and reviews, which is the cool part where we're starting to look back and see what this research we thought was true was actually not anymore. So it's like saturated fat and dietary cholesterol aren't as harmful as we thought they were, which that not necessarily was the case in the past. But it's like, oh, you still need your cholesterol below 200 and take a statin.
Right.
Maybe not.
There's some monetary incentive there that's pushing, perpetuating this myth of cholesterol. And that's always a challenge because there's so much funding that goes into pharmaceuticals and the pharmaceutical companies that then back these research projects that
Yeah.
can help keep a drug on the market and keep it viable for the company and its investors to continue to profit from that pharmaceutical. So that is definitely a challenge. And I also think that it's so ironic that once we came out with these low fat nutritional recommendations from our government, that's when we started to see all these obesity and metabolic syndromes. They started to skyrocket because of we were losing fat in our diet. So it's obviously was not the right direction. And some people have course corrected that, but the myth is still being perpetuated. And we need to have more discussions like this to help people really cut through it and find out what they should be doing for better health. Will you explain why cholesterol builds up in the arteries and how this may actually be a protective measure to combat inflammation in the blood vessels?
Yeah. So that term, the buildup in arteries, is called atherosclerosis, right? So that's the fancy word for where there's an inflammation process, endothelial, or the walls of the arteries are creating dysfunction. Like they're not functioning, they're stressed. And so the body is putting cholesterol there to protect itself, right? So it's an initiation process because the body's like, hey, my arteries are getting stressed, they're getting thinner, and I don't want to stroke out and have a hole. And
Right.
so the body is super intelligent to design. It's going to put cholesterol to thicken that wall because it's being thin because of the high blood pressure, the diabetes, these other things that actually cause the problem. And so that's that response that's created to actually create that neuroprotective response, if that makes sense.
Right. One of the things that if you go in for just your standard physical, you're typically going to have a cholesterol level checked, and they'll
Yep.
often check LDL and HDL, total cholesterol. Some physicians will go a little bit further and get an ApoB as well. But one thing that I wish we looked at more frequently is looking at ox-LDL too, or
Yeah.
oxidized LDL in the body, because that is definitely a strong indicator of your risk of heart disease. So can you explain what oxidized cholesterol is, and then also why is it more harmful than regular cholesterol in the context of heart disease?
So it, yeah, I mean, the particle size, right? We've
Mm-hmm.
talked about that's a different way of looking at cholesterol. And ultimately, that's a better way of testing for it, where we're looking at particle size of LDL, HDL, the triglycerides. That's going to be way better determinant of overall risk factor for heart attack, heart disease, you name it. And those tests are almost never done. And that's because that's going to look at, all right, if the particles are too big or too small, it's going to determine risk. The oxidative process is basically how much stress is on the system. And cholesterol, LDL, HDL, VLDL, it's only bad when it gets oxidated. That's when it
Mm-hmm.
causes the stress. That's when it causes dysfunction. And so that's why that ox test is so important, because it's like, all right, now we know we're creating all this free radicals, we're creating all this stress in the system. Now it's become harmful. And in the treatment isn't lower cholesterol, it's called what's causing the oxidative stress. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we need to address. And that's what we need to look at. But
Oxidative stress is such an important marker for health in general and even the
yeah,
aging process. I mean, that's really the measurement of our antioxidant capacity, our ability
yeah,
to combat oxidation in the body, and the number of free radicals that are in there causing damage to tissues and cells. And so it's important that we have the right antioxidants that can help to mitigate that oxidation that occurs in our lipids and the fats that we have inside our body, and help protect us against that, because that
sure.
ultimately is going to trigger that inflammatory cascade that is then going to damage the arterial walls. The cholesterol is going to go there to fix it. For me, one of the landmark studies in the debate over cholesterol and its association with cardiovascular disease and mortality is the study published in Scientific Reports in 2019 This study actually looked at mortality among over 12.8 million adults. So we're not talking about an underpowered or a small pilot study. That is a huge amount of people. You don't have studies very often that have millions of people in them that we're looking at. Not only did it have millions of people, but it followed them for 12 years. Essentially, this study concluded that total cholesterol in the range of 160 to 249 those people experience reduced mortality. It is somewhat sex dependent and age dependent, but it's interesting that range was the most protective range and the best range of cholesterol, because those ranges can, depending on your sex and age, fall within borderline high and high cholesterol levels, where you would probably be prescribed a statin if you were with a Western practitioner. So from your perspective, what do you consider the optimal ranges for cholesterol in the body?
Total cholesterol, 200 to 225. Like, I'm not scared about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking at the whole picture, right? If I see somebody that has a 249 or 225, but their triglycerides are 225, which is starting to be borderline high, then we're really say, all right, what's going on here? What's the bigger picture? Why are you turning all of that glucose into fat? So that's one of those, it's looking at other markers to get a bigger picture of what's going on and saying, all right, we can't just single out just what's going on with cholesterol and saying, all right, this is good or bad, or we need to put you on a drug to lower it. Well, there's so many factors that influence that number. And most people just don't understand that concept, especially the triglyceride number of, I mean, most people that has high triglycerides, they also have an A1C of 7, 8, 9, 10, and their fasting blood glucose is 200, which means there's so much glucose in the system. The body says, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm going to turn this excess glucose into triglycerides in the form of fat, because it's got to put it somewhere. So that's a good understanding of what happens in the body and where it goes.
There's such a strong correlation with your metabolic activity, your cardiometabolic health, and whether you're going to have heart disease or not. And if you really get down to a lot of the core of many of the conditions that humans experience, they are related to how well we are managing our blood sugar and how much inflammation is in our body. We have to control those two markers in order to stay healthy. I find it interesting that statins are still considered the primary treatment option employed in Western medicine for high cholesterol. And even in some cases, if people will look for a natural approach, and they'll use red yeast rice, which has natural statins basically inside the red yeast rice. But some other supplements that have shown to be effective in clinical research are actually strong antioxidants like alpha lipoic acid. That's been used in clinical research and found successful in helping to get your cholesterol ranges in a good range, in that optimal range. So if somebody is prescribed a statin, or there's probably a lot of people listening to this show right now that are on a statin already and just wondering, what is the risk of me being on that? Can you explain just a little about what are the risks associated with statins?
Yeah, I would say the most common is probably muscle pain, weakness. I think that's kind of where it starts. And I usually see it with like lower extremity muscle pain, weakness. That's kind of where it starts. And most of the time, the thing is, oh, we're going to change it to a different one. We're going to change the dose and it should go away. But, it's like, that's an indicator that this isn't good for you. Liver damage, digestive problems, it can actually cause diabetes, which people don't realize. And then we start to have, when the muscle pain gets bad, it can turn into peripheral neuropathy, which, numbness, tingling, pain in the hands and the feet, right? And then bigger picture cognitive effects, right? Your brain is primarily made of fat.
Right.
What are we doing? We're decreasing the sterol, the good fats. And it's crazy the impact it can affect on every aspect of your body. Another even more, it can increase the risk of hemorrhagic stroke. Like I said, if we decrease these plaques early, what are we doing? We're decreasing the integrity of the blood vessels.
Mm-hmm.
So how many seniors are on a statin drug right now? 70%, like crazy amounts.
Yeah, a whole lot of them are. It's such a common drug that's prescribed, and I think another thing that we should be informing people about is that it's often associated with nutrient depletions.
Yeah.
It's particularly coenzyme Q10, which is a
Yeah.
very important enzyme in the body. It's also cardioprotective and important for energy production in your mitochondria. And so that could potentially be explaining part of these muscle aches that you're experiencing and the weakness. But there's just a whole host of things that can be a side effect. And I wish that physicians and prescribers spent more time with their patients going through these, because I think that in the modern model of medicine, where you have just a few minutes to talk to that patient, it's a matter of you get them in, you find the drug that fits their symptoms and their diagnoses, and then you send them away. And it's not saying, oh, but here's some of the risks or some of the side effects that you might experience if you choose to go on this medication. They just don't have the time to explain that.
Yep.
How do processed carbohydrates contribute to heart disease, and why are they considered a greater risk factor than cholesterol?
It's probably our biggest risk factor of all, right? It's that insulin resistance and diabetes all come from the processed carbohydrates. And when we consume large amounts of these things like white bread, sugary snacks, beverages, it's going to spike our blood sugar, and then our bodies have to respond. And then we spike it and respond, and spike it and respond. And what is that doing from our vascular system, right? It's putting more and more stress onto it. It's causing more and more inflammation. And it's also creating this dyslipidemia, this
Mm-hmm.
imbalance of the lipids that the refined carbohydrates make in this profile, right? That's going to increase your triglycerides. It's going to decrease your HDL, which is your good cholesterol. And it's just this massive cycle that is perpetuated, right? That's going to increase obesity. That's going to increase your blood pressure. All these go back to, yeah, we could correlate that to cholesterol causing the problem, but it's the inflammatory response. It's the high blood pressure from the excess carbohydrates and the processed and refined sugars that's actually causing the problem. It's not necessarily cholesterol. That's just a reactive mechanism.
Right. Related to processed carbs, insulin resistance is a huge problem. There's a lot of people who are walking around that don't even know that they have it, and that's pre-diabetic. Several episodes ago, I had Dr. Tulasano on, and she talked about insulin resistance and some natural solutions to help improve your insulin sensitivity so you don't continue down that pathway towards diabetes. But how does insulin resistance, you have mentioned it and kind of discussed it a little bit, how does it relate to the development of heart disease?
Well, it occurs when the body cells become less responsive to insulin, right? So insulin is the hormone that regulates blood glucose levels. Basically, when you eat stuff, your body always has to produce insulin to absorb the glucose. And over time, if you're constantly doing this, your body's going to struggle to respond. And the elevated insulin levels are going to basically lead to that atherosclerosis plaques. It's going to narrow the arteries. It's going to restrict the blood flow, and ultimately going to increase the body's risk for heart attack and stroke. But it's the same things of the dyslipidemia, the inflammation, hypertension. Like it's the same concept that ultimately insulin resistance is the bigger problem. It's not the cholesterol. It's what's slowly killing us over time, unfortunately. And it's such a massive, massive problem in our country. Like, do you know how many people are diabetics? Is it 30, 40 million in our country? Something like that? Crazy?
I think you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an insane number.
It is. And there was a study, I think it was only about 2 years ago, that came out and said that only 1 in 14 of us has optimal cardiometabolic health in the United States, and as far
Wow.
as adults. That's a very minuscule number that have good cardiometabolic health, and the rest of us need to work on it because there's something wrong with our insulin or our glucose or our blood pressure, or some factor of that cardiometabolic health that we need to change. It could be adiposity, your belly fat, the weight, which really correlates with the obesity epidemic that we have here in the United States as well.
Well, I know, and it's like, you remember, you've probably seen the studies of like early 90s, even early 2000s, where like they have a map of the United States and they look at obesity rates. And at one point, like early 10, 20 years ago, there used to be a few states like Colorado, maybe Washington, Vermont, that like they weren't obese, right? Like overall, like there's not a single state in the United States that isn't in the under obese category anymore as an overall population. It's just like, it's appalling. It's just sad. Like we're fed the wrong information and we're eating all the wrong stuff, and everyone's just overweight and obese, and we've got to change our tune.
Yeah, and I think that we've done a little bit of a disservice where we're becoming overly sensitive to talking about obesity, and we don't want to offend people, and I don't want to fat shame people at all, because that's not what you want to do. But we do want to talk about the risks associated with obesity and the potential health risks that can come with it, and then help individuals find ways to reverse that trend within themselves, because it is largely lifestyle. I know there are some genetic factors associated with it, but it's largely lifestyle. And we can change our lifestyles. We can work on hormones that are not, if we have leptin and ghrelin imbalances, and we can work on these things to help people get back to a better weight, which is going to improve their cardiometabolic health along with it. How about dietary fats? At the beginning, you mentioned the seed oils, which has been a popular topic these days. How do dietary fats and oils relate to cholesterol levels?
Well, most of the time your diet doesn't really have, the research is basically proven it's like your diet doesn't really impact cholesterol that much. But it impacts it in the fact of, if you're eating the bad fats, the bad oils, what do? They create massive amounts of inflammation, which that goes back to the same thing, right? The inflammation, the oxidative stress, the denaturing of the cell membranes, those are your problems, right? So like saturated fat is good for you when it comes in meat and butter and cheese, coconut oil, avocados. Those are all awesome for you. They're all really good fats. Your cell membrane is made up of like 98% saturated omega-6s. So we need them. They're absolutely important. But when you consume them as bad fats, as the seed oils, the vegetable oils, the canola oils, the trans fats, sunflower, safflower, they're in everything, right? It's like when me and my wife go anywhere to eat, like, what are they cooking with? When we go buy stuff, packaged foods, it's so hard to find anything that's processed even a little bit, like frozen sweet potato fries, organic. You would think, oh, that should be fine. No, it has canola oil on it.
Yeah.
It's like, darn it. Like, I just want an easy thing to put in the oven. No. So it's the bad fats that are absolutely killing us. And that's the stuff we want to avoid, because that's what's creating this massive oxidative stress that denatures the cell membranes, that basically creates the cellular dysfunction. It's stick to the good fats and eat lots of them. And omega-3s are good. They're important. I don't recommend fish oils. That's a whole nother topic. But eating fish, wild caught fish is awesome. Consuming fish oil is maybe not so much, because that creates all oxidative problem too. But I think that answers the question.
Yeah, the fish oil is really about the quality of that fish oil, right? And also the form that you're getting. If you're getting the ethyl ester form, which is the cheaper form, it's not really well recognized by the body, but if you have a triglyceride form and one that has been taken great care to avoid that oxidation, there is good research and a lot of it showing that fish oil can be beneficial. But if you're getting an oxidized version, it's almost more harmful to consume it than it is to not consume it. And so you're right that you got to really be careful with that and make sure you're using a high quality product if you're taking the fish oil. My last question really revolves around public health guidelines. We've mentioned the government a couple of times. They've come out with nutritional guidelines that have been harmful. But how should public health guidelines and policies change in light of this emerging research and evidence about cholesterol?
We need to focus more on addressing the processed carbohydrates, the sugars, encouraging the good fats. I think that's a big part of it, right? Like, stop talking about cholesterol. When it comes to any public policy, like, the more you talk about the thing, the more issues, like, it's never going to go away. Let's talk about like the things that are actually going to help us fix the problem, and the cholesterol thing actually magically goes away. So avoiding the processed foods, the sugars, encouraging the good fats, and then is thinking about the overall dietary recommendations of how do we eat a diet variation of a Mediterranean diet, or maybe shifting to keto at some periods, or shifting to carnivore, or shifting to paleo, right? There's no perfect diet. Everyone responds differently. But that variation principle is what I preach to my patients all the time. I do all those all throughout the year, because if you do too much of one thing, it's always going to cause an issue. Everybody's a guru about like carnivore or paleo or keto. They're all awesome. They all have their benefits. Vegetarian has its benefits for a short time or for a season. And getting that variation principle is what I talk about. It's like, how do we make this simple? How do we make it easy? And I think that's kind of my focus on that. But, our biggest thing from an overall big picture is we've got to get rid of the processed carbs. We've got to get rid of the sugars. That's going to make the biggest impact. In the seed oils. Like, if you got rid of processed sugars and carbs and got rid of the bad oils, everyone's going to be healthier. It's like everybody that eliminates those, say, I'm going to stop sugar. That's why, what's that trendy diet where Whole30, right? That's why that works, right? Because that's what people are doing, because the standard American diet is carbs and sugars and this junk, and they finally stop that for 30 days. Like, I feel good. Oh, no crap, because you're not inflamed and full of glucose. Like, makes sense. And then they go right back to it. But
yeah, I'm a fan of what you said about all of those different eating patterns, and they all have benefits for various things. I mean, keto, especially for people who experience epilepsy disorders, and you can kind of reset some inflammation when you're on the carnivore diet for a while. And so they definitely have their place and their purpose, but I'm aligned that I generally don't tell people don't eat like that all your life. That's not really a lifetime thing. Humans are designed to be omnivores and to consume a variety of things. The key is to eat fresh foods. We shouldn't be consuming all this processed junk and oils that were originally designed to be engine lubricants as part of our diet, and they can long term have very harmful effects. And your nutrition is the foundation of your health. You've got to get that in the right place if you want to see success and be as healthy as possible. And that doesn't just mean physically healthy, but also mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you being on the show today. It's been good to have this discussion, and I hope that people have been enlightened and got some more information that they can go and talk to their doctors about if they need to, because they maybe have high cholesterol, and talk about some strategies that maybe will help them in avoiding having to be on a statin if that's possible. So I appreciate you again, and thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thank you for investing your precious time with us today. I trust you've uncovered valuable insights to elevate your health and enhance your quality of life. If you're hungry for more evidence-based wisdom to transform your well-being, I invite you to check out my 20-plus books, all waiting to be explored on my website, authorscott.com. Don't miss out on the chance to supercharge your knowledge. Please share, like, and subscribe to be part of the movement revolutionizing lives. In a world drowning in noise and endless information, your share can be the beacon that guides others to a better life. Together, let's make a difference by amplifying the life-changing knowledge you've gained today. Until next time, here's to your journey to boundless health and unbridled happiness.
Say